Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Durham District School Board of Trustees, I'd like to welcome you to the Standing Committee meeting of Monday, March 7th, 2022. This meeting will now come to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are there any changes to the agenda tonight? Seeing none, the agenda is approved as distributed. So I'd like to draw your attention to item 5, community presentations, and I'd like to welcome the Affinity Networks of the Durham District School Board this evening. Whenever you're ready.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Frank Samuels. I'm the principal of EB Finn Public School in Pickering and the co-chair of Shalom Durham, the Jewish Affinity Network of the DDSB. Welcome tonight to the Affinity Networks of the DDSB.
As we offer tonight as Affinity Networks, we would like to acknowledge that we attend not only as settlers, but also as immigrants, benefiting from the air, the land, and the water that has been made available. And for that, we are grateful.
What is an affinity network? Affinity networks are intended to bring people with common intersectionalities together. Affinity networks strive to form safe and brave spaces that provide support, healing, and connection. They also advocate on behalf of their members. I'd like to turn the mic over to Shahana Arain to read our joint statement.
Thank you. This statement is presented on behalf of Affinity Networks of Durham and in collaboration with community members who may be present this evening. Dear Chairperson Morton and Board of Trustees, please accept this letter on behalf of Affinity Networks of Durham, pursuant to comments from the January 24th, 2022 Governance Committee meeting, specific to the Human Rights Policy and Procedure. In response to this meeting, Affinity Networks would like it to be noted for the record that we and the communities that we serve have been deeply impacted by the implications of problematic statements made on January 24th, and want to particularly focus on the experience of those identifying as 2SLGBTQI+, for whom these statements have resulted in further fear and re-traumatization. Affinity networks exist because inequities in our system need to be addressed. And while we work alongside the Durham District School Board, we are also here as advocates for our colleagues, our students, and the diverse communities we serve. With the goal of centering identity and with respect to intersectionality, Affinity Networks are committed to eliminating barriers, empowering voice, and engaging in critical discourse. As Affinity Networks, when needed, we are prepared to provide critical feedback to the board in order to elicit necessary change. It is for this reason we want to be clear on our position in regards to freedom of speech and the language and culture of white supremacy. There should be no confusion between freedom of speech covering as racist and/or discriminatory ideology, nor should there be a backing away from clearly naming and defining white supremacy culture and how it operates in its relationship to colonialism and power and privilege. In an effort of good faith, with the intention of building relationships and listening and learning, Affinity Networks would like to extend a formal invitation to our trustees to join in a collaborative effort in which to unpack and further deconstruct the thematic notions presented at the January 24th Governance Committee meeting. Our goal is to move together in the work of Indigenous rights and human rights and offer trustees an opportunity to not only understand the full works of Affinity Networks, but also an entry point in exercising power and privilege in the best benefit of all those we serve in public education. We look forward to your response of our invitation, and we offer this letter on behalf of Affinity Networks as represented by Keen, DBEN, Shalom Durham, 9, Pride Network, MEND, and DENSA. Thank you.
Who are the affinity networks of the DDSB? There's DBEN, the Durham Black Educators Network, DENSA, the Durham Educators Network of South Asians, Keen, the Keenanau Indigenous Employee Network, MEND, Muslim Educators Network of Durham, 9, Neurodivergent Infinity Network of Educators, Shalom Durham, the Jewish Educators Network of the DDSB.
The Affinity Networks work to enrich the DDSB, place equity inclusion at the forefront of our work, promote student voice and leadership, build and enhance diversity and inclusion, and add to the wellness of employees. We provide a safe space for members and allies. We provide education and advocacy, offer resources, provide professional development, build positive relationships with community partners. And this concludes our presentation. And again, we offer that extension to work with us and getting to know us. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Shahana and Frank and Imran for that presentation. So thank you for the presentation, and we welcome your voice. We would like to thank you for and appreciate bringing this your thoughts forward to us. And we will now be moving forward with our next item on the agenda. Thank you again.
Christine, did you want me to start?
Thank you, Stephen. We'll now move on to item 6. And I will call on Superintendent Nevels then to begin the presentation around the grade 9, inclusive grade 9 programming and secondary student involvement. Go ahead, Stephen.
Good evening, everyone. Our report this evening can be found on pages 1 to 16 of your package. The report focuses on the supports that have been created for the implementation of the new de-streamed grade 9 mathematics course, as well as information on our inclusive grade 9 program beginning in September of 2022. Included in the report is the achievement and enrollment data for the previously streamed mathematics courses and current locally developed and de-streamed mathematics courses. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Caitlin Twitchen and Lauren Smark, centrally seconded mathematics facilitators, to highlight for you the professional development and resources that have been provided to support with the implementation of the new de-streamed mathematics curriculum.
Thank you. Prior to the release of the curriculum on June 9th, 2021, we began formulating a district plan to support our DDSB schools and teachers in the preparation for the new curriculum and programming changes for the 2021-2022 school year. We began by investigating provincial boards that were offering academic-only mathematics with a goal of identifying promising practices. We had Jason Toe, Toronto District School Board Coordinator, come to speak with our math heads to learn about how the TDSB had implemented the academic-only math curriculum throughout their entire district the previous year. Heads were so interested in the positive outcomes of de-streaming that Jason had shared, they wanted their entire department to hear. So we offered a similar presentation to the entire system. A recording of this presentation is posted in our on-demand section of our math resource course for teachers to review. With the assistance of other departments such as Indigenous, Equity, ESL, EDL, Positive School Climate, Student Success, and K-8 curriculum, webinars were created and posted in our math resource course, which introduced the reasons why we are de-streaming, address myths about de-streaming, pedagogy considerations to support a de-streamed classroom, introduction sessions about coding, and summaries of the changes to the 2020 K-8 math curriculum. Once the ministry released the curriculum and their supporting resources, such as the key changes to the grade 9 curriculum and 7, 8, 9 curriculum alignment documents, we continued our work with the support of an MTH1W curriculum writing team. This team consisted of 12 secondary educators who worked to develop unit and lesson plans to assess all of the new grade 9 de-streamed mathematics expectations through conversations, observations, and products. Activities that allowed all students to access the curriculum expectations and have equitable and engaging ways to demonstrate their learning and understanding throughout the course were provided. Throughout the first and second quadmester, our math team offered a variety of in-person and on-demand supports to assist teachers with the implementation of the new de-streamed math curriculum. At the beginning of quadmester 1 and 2, the math team visited each secondary school and met with their grade 9 math team, which consisted of administrators and educators. During this time, we collaborated with teachers, sharing best practices surrounding assessment, gap closing, and suggested activities and resources from our summer writing initiative that could be used in their classroom to help students succeed. With teacher feedback, we were able to revise and add to the resources that had previously been created. As part of the ministry's math strategy, we met with all grade 9 mathematics teachers at each of the 4 identified schools to assist with their goal setting for the year. Supports included facilitating discussions, sharing activities and resources, and building capacity in the areas of assessment practices, student engagement, and gap closing. Throughout the year, a variety of lunch and learns were designed and delivered to support the implementation of the new de-streamed curriculum. Topics included coding, high impact practices for teaching mathematics, and a variety of digital tools that could be integrated into the classroom to support student learning. These lunch and learns were delivered live to teachers who registered to attend, and then were recorded for all teachers to access on demand. We remain committed to assisting teachers through the implementation of the de-streamed math course and meet with teachers and departments regularly as we continue to move through our second semester.
Moving forward, we look to continue to focus on supporting schools and individual teachers with the implementation of de-streaming during the 2022-2023 school year. With the ongoing support of Math Heads Council, we will continue to develop professional learning for teachers, offering both live sessions and on-demand learning opportunities within our math resource course. Future sessions will include topics such as assessment and evaluation, focused on a de-streamed classroom, implementing high impact practices, and using manipulatives for the success of all students. We will continue to collaborate with school teams and individual teachers to support identified goals and improve student achievement. Through feedback from teachers, we'll continue to develop additional resources and lessons that reflect best practices that ensure we are meeting the diverse needs of students in the DDSB. Lastly, we will continue collaborating with our inclusive grade 9 coaches to implement best practices for the continued successful implementation of D-Stream mathematics. We will also continue to collaborate with the Inclusive Student Services team to develop additional supports that meet the diverse learning needs of students within the grade 9 D-Streamed mathematics classroom.
Thank you, Lauren and Caitlin. Included in the package this evening as well is a document that has been created titled What Families Want to Know About D-Streaming and Inclusive Grade 9. This document, as well as virtual parent engagement sessions devoted to course selection, have been developed to support parents with understanding the shift away from streaming in grade 9 in all schools. Over the course of the last few years, D-Streamed curriculum has been piloted at various school locations in the DDSB. With us this evening, I welcome Principal Eleanor McIntosh and the administrative team from Ajax High School to share a little of their journey as a school who has been on the forefront with the introduction of D-Streamed curriculum.
Thank you, Superintendent Nevels, and good evening, everyone. I just want to offer an introduction to the admin team who's also joining. We have Vice Principal John Lepage, as well as Vice Principal Alicia Russell, who's also be doing the presentation with us this evening. If I can ask, shall I share my screen?
By all means, Eleanor.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to begin. No. Great. So for our journey this evening, we just want to talk a little bit about the context about how we got started. It was really important as we began the journey that we asked two critical questions that really framed our direction forward around inclusion. So how is it that we create inclusive environments where diversity is valued and honored? And how is it that we create inclusive spaces that support the well-being of students? And really what the focus is for us as we started the journey was really thinking about the demographic of our school population and keeping in mind that we have a range of learners within our classroom spaces. And how is it that we are meeting the needs of all of those learners in our classroom spaces? Context, we teach students, not curriculum, became one of our mantras as we began the journey. We wanted to make sure that we centered research and practices from our neighboring boards and those that have been working in the field for a number of years. And so this slide highlights some of the context that we provided to staff as we introduced this focus and topic of streaming and de-streaming and the impacts that it has on our students. Alison Games San Vicente presented at York University's conference recently on de-streaming math and talked a lot about the impacts of streaming on students. And so we want to make sure that we provided that context to our teachers as we moved forward into the journey. This gives you a bit of a roadmap of how it is that we moved through since over the last 4.5 years. So in 2017, what was really important is that we centered and started to build capacity with staff around critical consciousness. So what does it mean to be a practitioner of inclusion, equity, and diversity as we're starting to try and create and open up spaces in our classrooms for the range of learners? As we moved into 2018 and 19, those conversations started to filter into the classroom and we began our first pilot with grade 9 geography. The reason why we chose geography as our starting point is for a couple of reasons. One, it has high content of both literacy and numeracy in that particular course. We also had a very central and focused group of staff who were interested in piloting something like this with our students. And so that is where the conversations began. As we moved into 2019 and 20, we went on to onboard inclusive grade 9 French, and that came as a result of feedback sharing between staff members and department heads in our leadership team that signaled to them that we too can offer a grade 9 inclusive program in our department. And so that was at the behest of staff that we onboarded the next inclusive course. That signaled to us that we had a movement happening. And so in 2020 and 21, again, the momentum of our leadership that was occurring signaled to another department that perhaps it was time to onboard English. And so the grade 9 English program then also became our next to join French and geography. Even during the pandemic, they decided that that was something that they felt very strongly about because they started to see that we were moving in this direction. In 21 and 22 this year, because all of the departments started to move in that direction, of course, we had to include math as part of the ministry mandate, but also science and grade 10 history came alongside. And so we started to see some real momentum going forward. And then, of course, moving forward into 2022-23, we'll be having our full program, inclusive grade 9 program that will be running. It was really, really important that we spend some time with staff building capacity around inclusion, as I mentioned, because we know that the teacher at the core of the classroom is the heart and soul of success for our students. And so we wanted to make sure that we grounded those conversations in why. Why was this why is inclusion an important mindset when you're jumping into a de-streamed program? And this is not just for grade 9, but really thinking about all of our learners beyond grade 9 as well. We really focused in and spoke a lot about neurodiversity and how is it that we don't have one type of learner, but we have the range. And so we need to flex and adapt our programming and instructional strategies in order to be able to support and meet the needs of all of those range of learners. We emphasize community building because we know that when there is belonging and value in classrooms, all of our learners feel supported and have the opportunity for success in the classroom. So what we did at the beginning of each semester is that we stopped for 3 days and just focused on a series of community building practices that allowed for that well-being and that belonging to be centered prior to even getting into any of the heavy lifting of curriculum. From there, we also talked all through the last 4.5 years, there's been a focus around equity, anti-oppression, and anti-colonial practices in support of the human rights and Indigenous human rights policies that have now come into effect. And we felt that that through line helped to really solidify the actions that we were seeing in the changes in curriculum. And then finally, anti-colonial assessment and evaluation has something that has come into effect in the last 3 years with a heavy emphasis around triangulation of data in the classroom to make sure that we are capturing in a fair and equitable manner all of the learning that is happening over the course of a semester. In terms of our how and with the process with our staff, right from the get-go, we made sure that we encouraged a lot of staff voice. We wanted to make sure that the leadership that we were and the goals that we were establishing really reflected the voices of staff and helped to shape our goals going forward. And so we had common commitments that all agreed to participate in, and we ground all of our work around these common commitments so that we have a central focus. Collaboration was really important, deprivatizing those classrooms and really centering and valuing time together in order to plan, develop, and implement not just our de-streamed program, but all of our programming going forward. Collective teacher efficacy, we know that that has a very high effect size as per Johns Hattie's research. And so the feeling as though a teacher can have an effect and influence in the classroom on the success of students has been a significant driver in terms of how it is that we're supporting staff to realize the opportunity that they have in the classroom with students. Context over content. Again, this is centering the well-being piece of our students and making sure that they feel as though that their voice is valued and heard in the classroom, and they're participating in the learning and the design and the assessment practices that are happening in the classroom. And then definitely providing a myriad of research and evidence-informed practices. So it's not just the voice of the team, but it's the voice of those in the field who we know are doing this work and have been doing the work for a long time. Again, we wanted to make sure that we're always bringing in quotes and voice of others who are also signaling that we are moving in the right direction. And so again, we had the opportunity to hear our director, Nora Marsh, at the York University presentation, who again spoke to this piece, which also helped to signal solidarity and support from within the school board for our staff. I'd like to pass it over now to John Lepage, who's going to talk a little bit more about the data of our impact over the last few years.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, and good evening, everyone. We've been tracking our school achievement data to monitor our collective impact with the implementation of inclusive grade 9 courses, and we're pleased to be able to share some of this evidence with you this evening. The first course that was implemented, as Eleanor mentioned, is the grade 9 geography course, and this would have been in the 2018 to 2019 school year. And so as we look at these charts on the left, you can see achievement levels over 5 years in the academic course from 2016 to 2021. The academic course then became our inclusive grade 9 course beginning in 2018. And on the right are the applied course achievement levels for the 2 years prior to implementation. So when looking at the applied course in 2017, 2018, we can see that 44% of our students achieved a level 3 or 4. And if we looked at the inclusive course in the first year of implementation, 2018-19, we can see that 60% of students achieved level 3 and 4. And this improved further the following year in 2019-2020, where 69% of students achieved level 3 and 4 or provincial standard. And we think that this is important data, not only because does it show more equitable outcomes for students, but is also data from prior to the beginning of the pandemic. So for comparison purposes, we're able to see some trending data before the impact of the pandemic. If we go to the next slide, the next course we implemented was grade 9 French during 2019-2020. And again, on the right-hand side, you will see applied course achievement data for the 2 years prior to implementation of the grade 9 inclusive course. And when looking at 2018-2019, we see that 49% of students in the applied stream reached level 3 and 4 versus 70% in the academic stream. And in the first year of implementation of the inclusive grade 9 French 2019-2020, 65% of all students achieved level 3 or 4 or provincial standard. If we move to the next slide, thank you. This year, along with all secondary schools on the board, we begin the implementation of the grade 9 de-streamed course, and we're very pleased to be sharing some of this data with you this evening. I think it's important that we acknowledge that some of the data over the past 2 years certainly has been impacted by the pandemic. However, our early indications of this year's implementation of the de-streamed math course is very positive. Here on the left are the achievement levels for Ajax High School for both the applied and the academic courses over the last 5 years. And if you look at the last column in those charts, 2020, 2021, 76% of students in the academic stream achieved level 3 and 4, and 61% of students in the applied stream achieved provincial standard. And on the right is the achievement data for our D-stream classes for both quadrimesters 1 and 2 of this year. And we can see that 67% of students have achieved provincial standard at level 3 or 4. So what the data is showing across all of these courses is at Ajax is that the implementation of inclusive grade 9 courses has led to more equitable outcomes for our students. And I'm now going to pass things over to Vice Principal Russell, who will share a little bit about our student experience.
Great, thank you so much. So thinking about how all of these pieces from Caitlin and Lauren talking about the work at the board and how they land on the students' desks, we wanted to engage our students to see what are their thoughts and what were most impactful for them as they engaged in the onboarding of the Math Inclusive program with us at Ajax. So when asked which type of activities do they enjoy the most, the one that really stood out for them was Knowledge Hook. And this was an ability to have instant feedback and to get a gauge of how they are doing in the course. And regardless of the level that they may have thought they were, these were one of these pieces in the interactive instructional tools that they really enjoyed. Going on to the next question about what do you think math was going to be like in high school? We had a variety of answers when we asked our students in quad 1 and quad 2. And this response really highlights the variety of tools and instructional practices that were used within the classroom. So this student said, I thought math was going to be difficult and hard to understand, but it was easy to understand more than in an elementary school. The examples were clear, and the teacher provided tools and manipulatives that improved my learning in math. When moving on to the community building, that was one of the key pieces that Eleanor had grounded our introduction of this presentation with, is also a signal to the impact of the social and emotional learning aspects of the new math curriculum. This student responded and said, I thought it was going to be really hard, but it became easier as I got into it. My teacher was really good at explaining, took their time, and didn't rush anything. Honestly, math was my favorite class. When moving on to one of our final questions when we were looking at student feedback and the impact of these shifts within the classroom, the last question that we asked was, how did you feel about being in a math class that was only at one level, so not necessarily specific to academic or applied? And these series of responses really highlight the students' recognition of having diverse learners within the classroom and realizing that there's no stigmatizing of the learners and the acceptance of others' learning needs, as well as the students, the teacher's responsibility in order to be responsive to each learning need. So this student said, honestly, it was pretty fun. There was a lot of interaction in the class. No one felt left out. Everyone helped each other. Another student responded along that same questioning. I understood all the math we were doing. Having students at different learning levels made it challenging. Some students needed more time to process, and this held others back in the class who learn quicker. For those that learn quicker, they could spend more time learning other things. So there were definitely different entry points for different students depending on their engagement in their classroom. So we're really happy to be able to share that insight of how all of these shifts landed on the students' desks at Ajax High School.
So on behalf of the team from Ajax, we wanted to thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of our learning and progress as we are moving forward with inclusive grade 9 programming at Ajax High School and the DDSB as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation this evening, Eleanor, John, and Alicia. Although we've done a lot of learning as a system about human rights, we've not shared the draft policy that's currently being looked at with our schools other than for feedback. What we can see through the foundation of equity is at the center of programming, that is the programming decisions that are being made within our schools. So thank you for that. This concludes our combo of presentations for this evening. We're all available for any questions related to the report, the supports available for grade 9 programming, or any of the pilot initiatives at Ajax High School.
Thank you, Superintendent Nevels. Just looking to see Donna at Trustee Edwards has a question, and then followed by Trustee Barnes. Go ahead, Donna.
Thank you. First, I wanted to comment about just recognizing that during a pandemic, just looking at the data, how well our teachers and staff have met the challenge of putting in a new curriculum, learning a very new curriculum in a very short time, and so forth. So I just wanted to make that comment at the beginning. I'm just have two questions. One is to do with specifically Ajax, and the other one to do with the data that was in the report. But you talked about the knowledge hook and instant feedback. Does that also allow the student to do sort of their own self-assessment to see where they are when you talk about instant feedback? Because I'm not familiar with knowledge hook.
Caitlin, did you want to maybe answer that question regarding knowledge hook?
I would love to. So Knowledge Hook is a program that the teacher can assign missions, but as they or have a game show to make it sort of interactive, sort of like a live mission instead. As they release that content, students can also work independently on their own to be able to be getting additional feedback. But the system, as the teacher assigns these activities, also gives that student feedback right away. And it allows them to create sort of a portfolio of all of their work as they take snapshots of some of the work that they do in the questions if the teacher chooses to set that up for them.
Okay, thank you. Just my second question has to do with the data, and it has to do with the absences related to the data, and the absences don't actually list the longitudinal data. So I'm just assuming that that data is maybe for the most recent year. I'm not sure, but I look at the absences, particularly for students with IEPs, and their absences seem to be anywhere between a quarter to a third higher than others, and we know that absences. So I'm looking at engagement, and that as far as the streaming is concerned, have we lost engagement, or those absences are just higher because they're from the last couple of years, and it's as pandemic? I'm not sure.
So in terms of the initial data that's shared, when it lists an average absence, that's the average absences per student. So over that 5 years, that's how many on average the student would have. In terms of the de-streaming course, you're spot on, Trustee Edwards, in terms of comparing data. Because it is quadmestered, it looks slightly different. So we don't quite understand the full impact that quadmesters have had on the system, but you may see as well that those are spiking a little bit higher also because of the pandemic.
Thanks very much. Go ahead, Trustee Barnes. Go ahead, Patrice.
Thank you, Christine. I just want to ask, I know when we started out with the discussions around de-streaming, we had some parents and concerns around, one, for students with IEP, how they would adjust and how they would be supported in a de-streamed class. And two, that the possibility for some parents that had students in academic courses, that these de-streamed courses would be sort of not at an academic level because it's being rolled out for all students. So I just wondered what would be your feedback or comment to those questions.
Thank you, Trustee Brad. So a couple pieces there. In terms of students with an IEP, we're watching the data very carefully because we want to understand if there are any impacts on our students that have IEPs. And you can see through the data in terms of achievement rates, we are noticing that our students that are identified, not gifted, are not meeting provincial standard compared to their peers that are do not have an IEP. So that's something we're watching very carefully, and we've put some supports in place to help those students within that course. Again, when we're comparing the data, it's really difficult for us to see because we're in the quadmester. We don't know if it's the quadmester that's had the impact on their learning or if it's the new course. But over time, we hope through second semester, we'll be able to gather some more data that we can compare to previous years to see if there's an impact there. In terms of the academic historical students and the concerns that parents may have, you'll notice from the achievement data that our students are achieving at a higher standard within that de-streamed course. Another point to consider in there as well is that there is another component to the grade 10 math course that has been yet to be released by the ministry. That was also to support students that are transitioning out of the D stream, potentially into the academic stream at that point in time.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I'd like to thank Superintendents Lazarus and Nevels and your amazing team. And move on to item 6B on the agenda. I'm going to call on Director Marsh and the senior team to present the operational plan for 2021-22. So over to you, Director Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. Good evening to all trustees. Very pleased to be presenting along with the members of the senior team an update on the 21-22 operational plan. It's intended to provide you with a status report on the key strategies we identified in terms of implementing for this year. As you are aware, this operational plan is an extension to the implementation of the 2018-2023 Ignite Learning Strategic Plan, featuring updated strategies that continue to be reflective of student, staff, and community voice, and that center Indigenous and human rights. As a team, we remain committed in terms of the district to implementing research-based practice to meet the needs of our students. The 21-22 operational plan update is being delivered within the context of understanding the significant impact that the pandemic continues to have on operations within the district. Despite the challenges of the past year and for example, staff shortages, so not as much opportunity for professional learning and safety considerations, we have been able to commit to those key strategies that we identified for you last September. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. As we look forward to more ideal learning and working conditions to implement the Ignite Learning Strategic Plan, we have to recognize that, simultaneously need to recognize that the current environment is definitely not business as usual, despite our ambitious implementation of many key strategies. As the pandemic continues and evolves and changes the circumstances for our students and their families, as well as staff, we need to manage its impact and ensure that we continue to remain responsive, understanding the importance of relationships, mental health, and achieving high expectations and learning for all students. We recognize that the work we are doing needs to position us as a system that is responsive to great diversity of needs amongst our community. This fine balance is done in consultation with school staffs and with great sensitivity amongst every staff member of the Durham District School Board. Next slide, please.
Within the operational plan, the student learning and well-being outcome overarchingly ensures that student voices and identities are honored in innovative environments that are focused on inquiry, well-being, and global citizenship. School cultures engage students to thrive academically, socially, physically, and emotionally. The work staff have done so far this year toward meeting the goals set out in each strategic initiative of student learning well-being reaffirms our understanding that when we consider student achievement, we know it directly connects with student identity, which also speaks to our work in equity and further links to well-being and engagement. We believe that every child needs to feel a sense of belonging where their voice is valued so that we are truly reflective of how we engage students in all aspects of learning.
The people and culture outcome descriptor empowers staff to contribute to and enhance a positive and supportive organizational culture through respectful relationships and processes that are inclusive, responsive, fair, and equitable.
To support our shared commitments and responsibilities, the following key principles continue to guide our approaches to ongoing implementation of the initiatives in the plan by integrating human rights, Indigenous rights, anti-oppression, equity, and intersectionality with a focus on addressing all forms of discriminatory and racist barriers. We continue to engage, consult, and build relationships with students, families, employees, and communities to shape our planning and to inform responsive services, resources, supports, and decision-making. We'll be transparent about our processes and clearly communicate our actions and outcomes. We're creating opportunities for collaborative professionalism in the district's work and implement practices that are trauma-informed. We're committed to fostering service-oriented approaches that encourage innovative, equitable, responsive processes and practices. We'll uphold our responsibilities and accountabilities through ongoing data collection, feedback, and reporting.
One of the key initiatives under both the student learning and well-being outcome and the people and culture outcome is our continued focus on upholding human rights. This includes identifying, preventing, and addressing all forms of discrimination, such as anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, faithism, classism, and all other forms of racism and discrimination in our learning and our working environments. And the report highlights several actions. After an extensive two-phased community consultation process, the proposed draft human rights, anti-discrimination, and anti-racism policy and procedures package is currently before the board's Governance and Policy Committee. And the draft policy and procedures include specific roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities across the system, with a focus on culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy and universal design for learning in schools and classrooms. Professional development was provided at school, system department, and system levels to support staff in identifying barriers and in shifting practices to uphold human rights. Of note, many teams and departments participated in learning led by Dr. Nicole West Burns to develop specific approaches to addressing anti-Black racism, and additional learning is planned to support the implementation of the draft human rights policy. In addition, initiatives like Be Me or Black Excellence Made Evidence and the Cypher series for Black male empowerment provided students with opportunities to explore identity, experiences, and the impacts of anti-Black racism. The report also outlines actions to support student accommodations during the pandemic, an initiative led by the Abilities Center to enhance accessibility, and work underway to address the Visible Everyday Committee's recommendations to better support 2S LGBTQI students and staff.
A key priority for both student learning and well-being and people and culture is for all employees to engage in foundational learning about Indigenous rights and the ongoing impacts of colonialism in schools and workplaces to support the implementation of the Indigenous education policy and procedure. All system leaders, school leaders, and central staff have engaged in 2 learning sessions alongside Indigenous scholar Nancy Rowe. School leaders have engaged monthly in learning within Families of Schools meetings and are taking this learning back to their school teams and departments. These learning opportunities have been rich and transformational as we all begin to identify and remove ongoing impacts of colonialism and oppressive structures in our schools and workplaces. Indigenous support teachers, the Indigenous Education Resource website, and the purchasing of vetted texts has guided teaching and learning that focuses on anti-colonial teaching practices in the integration of Indigenous histories, truths, and contributions. Throughout phase 1 implementation of contemporary First Nation, Métis, and Inuit voices, grade 11 English, coaches have facilitated learning opportunities focused on prioritizing student-selected texts, elements of universal design for learning, and the development of critical thinking skills. Within Quadmester 1, 94.5% of students were past the course, with 75% achieving level 3 or level 4. Student and parent voice indicated that students were excited, engaged, and curious, and that the content was extremely relevant. We look forward to continuing to support phase 2 school teams as we prepare for district-wide implementation in fall 2022. We recognize the positive impact outdoor learning has on student well-being, and it's significant for Indigenous students. The Indigenous land-based learning coach collaborates with the Indigenous Education Department, Indigenous scholars, and the outdoor education team to provide in-person and virtual learning programming that is inclusive of Indigenous ways of knowing and relevant content.
Inclusive student services and school-based staff work together to foster environments which are mentally healthy spaces. This includes continued implementation of a tiered support for students that both proactively and responsively meets their well-being and mental health needs. As a district, our commitment is to have a foundation of mental health for student well-being and learning, both through service access, both district and in the community, for those who require more intensive specialized services. Our clinical practices are being examined to further understand embedded Eurocentric foundations and disrupt practices to shift to better service our students and our families. This includes review of training protocols, including our response to traumatic events revised this fall, training such as suicide risk prevention and intervention, as well as our direct service pathways. Focused on student and family needs, we are proud of the work that the teams have accomplished already this year, balancing the time needed to reflect and reshape our practices while engaged at direct service at a high level of referral and plan of care rate across the district. Complex work that has an impact on those providing care at both the school and the system levels. We are committed to continuing the work to build trauma-sensitive practices in schools, but to do so thoroughly meant taking an intentional pause this fall. Community partnerships are integral to the provision of mental health supports across all tiers, supporting the needs of students, and that's a commitment of our teams. With referral rates continuing to increase, it is imperative that we are reflective about mental health supports and actively seek to grow responsive, innovative programs that meet student needs and leverage community partnerships, such as those noted in the operational plan update.
Our ongoing work through the Make a Difference Depot supporting economically disadvantaged students and families, as well as our differentiated supports for priority schools, has been complemented this year by full-time math coaches in 11 of our priority schools. In addition, a new partnership with Ontario Tech University's Faculty of Education has resulted in a cohort of teacher candidates earning a Teaching in Priority Schools certificate based on their teaching and learning experience in priority schools across DDSB. More info on that program will be shared at our next standing committee meeting on April 4th. Student voice is at the center of our teaching, learning, leadership, and actions. Family of Schools superintendents had the opportunity to attend student senate meetings to share about their roles and system responsibilities and answer questions from the students. We have also shared student census data and positive school climate data with the students to get their thinking and ideas about the impact of our operational goals. Our next steps include student focus groups. We are looking forward to hearing student voices on our work that puts Indigenous rights, human rights, equity, and student well-being at the center of what we do.
Engaging parents continues to be an important aspect of our work. The Parent Involvement Committee has met 3 times, engaging in conversation to guide parent engagement opportunities, share parent voices, and at one of our meetings provide input on the draft human rights, anti-discrimination, and anti-racism policy. The Parent Involvement Committee also held a regional parent reaching out pro-grant session. 74 members from school community councils across the region attended this session to collaborate, discuss, and share ideas for school-based programs that would engage parents in their local community. Subsequently, 62 schools and community councils across the system, as well as 2 affinity networks, have applied for funding to complete a variety of parent engagement opportunities at the school level. The committee is also planning parent engagement sessions to address the mental health and well-being of our students and also in a variety of other areas. The French as a Second Language Parent Network has offered 2 evening sessions designed to engage families in discussions and sharing of strategies to support at-home family-based learning opportunities. Our ongoing work with the Parent Involvement Committee and with the French as a Second Language Parent Network will continue to support, encourage, and enhance meaningful parent engagement at the school level and at the board level. To align and allocate resources with an equity lens, a representative committee of school and central administration has reviewed the block budget allocation methodology and is updating it for the 2022-2023 school year. It is hoped that this realignment will provide equity of access to outcomes for all of our students.
You're on mute, Superintendent Nevels.
I am so sorry. The video came on, but the sound didn't. As part of our continuous focus on re-engaging students to learning, a variety of re-engagement initiatives in collaboration with inclusive student services, social work, student success and guidance teams have been implemented, including additional regional alternative programs and individualized programming for students. This year, we have focused on ensuring that students in grades 7 and 8 are aware of our specialist high skills majors available in each of our local high schools. And as part of this initiative, videos of students sharing their SHSM experiences have been created for schools to increase knowledge of the programs. To support the ongoing visits of math coaches in schools with school teams, we continue to provide synchronous lunch and learns, and on-demand learning for all of our educators.
Global competencies. The development of global competencies supports all students to reach high levels of achievement and to acquire the knowledge, skills, and values they need to become personally successful and actively engaged citizens. Staff are conducting research to consider the role of character education and global competencies to create an innovative framework that considers the attributes and skills of all DDSB graduates will be able to demonstrate. Proactive anti-bullying practices. We are continuing to center Indigenous rights and human rights in our words and our actions related to discipline and continue to focus on proactive whole school approach to reducing incidences of bullying and conflict. Our facilitators, Holly Richard, continues to work with schools and the system to build capacity in our understanding of the importance of developing healthy relationships within our buildings, the power of words and their impact, and how to support our students to live in the age of social media. Our substance abuse violence prevention coordinator, Dan Hogan, works with schools to support their work in bullying awareness and prevention. The work includes exploring challenges in the school climate, gathering student voice, developing leadership with students, and fostering healthy relationships. We know that our amazing leaders are doing the critical work by being visible in and out of their buildings.
As we continue learning who it is that we serve in the DDSB, in order to center identity in all our classrooms, we have reconstructed the manner in which families experience a successful start as they transition into kindergarten. Our evolved Great Beginnings model will emphasize the importance of both designing programs that meet specific needs of individual community, while also promoting the importance of collaboration between kindergarten educators and early year partners. Within the Great Beginnings start at the DDSB Introduction to Kindergarten model, each school will have the ability to customize the program and accompanying child development kit. Coming alongside this will be the Great Beginnings Learn at Home package, the Great Beginnings Start at the DDSB Introduction to Kindergarten Family Welcome Series, and Great Beginnings School Success Program. Centering student identity in our classrooms requires staff to have a clear understanding of their responsibilities as directed by the Indigenous Education Policy and the Human Rights Code in order to drive school decision-making. To support system capacity in this area, we have started the strategic integration of Indigenous education and equity into curriculum structures. All central educator staff who support many aspects of learning in schools as coaches, mentors, co-educators, etc., have engaged in explicit foundational learning as directed by the Indigenous Education Policy and our work in human rights, understanding anti-oppressive pedagogical practice. This learning will become embedded as an ongoing requirement of any central educator role.
I'll go ahead and get us started in terms of people and culture. We've already just
Sorry,
go ahead.
I was
Monday.
sorry about that. I was talking away and obviously was on mute again. Seems to be an issue tonight. Sorry. When employees feel welcome and experience positive work cultures, it benefits everyone. The draft Safe and Respectful Workplace Policy and Procedure, which aligns with the Human Rights Policy, has been shared with various employee groups, including federations, unions, associations, and our affinity networks for consultation. Their input has been incorporated into the final draft that will go to the Governance Committee. The workforce census information has also been shared with our employee groups for consultation and feedback, and we look forward to moving forward with the workforce census in the spring. The updated procedure on disconnecting from work has been shared with employees. Recognizing the importance of work-life balance, the DDSB has identified that we have many employees with different work hours, and so have structured the procedure to best cover all employees. It is important that everyone is able to unplug and recharge outside of their regular work hours. We value the voices of all employee groups as we work to continue to improve the employee experience. Representatives from many different departments participated in the leading equitable and accessible delivery sessions to review our inclusion and accessibility practices with facilitators from the Ability Center. We look forward to sharing the information from this process as it helps to inform our plans for accessibility.
Continuous professional learning is at the heart of improvement. Learning and improvement mean that we will continually monitor actions, progress, and results, and then make changes accordingly that keep us to our shared vision and ensure that it's achieved. It means we will continually invest in, support, and develop our staff. This will occur through interdepartmental planning and job-embedded professional development that will take innovative forms. It could be in person, virtual, through learning modules, ongoing conversations, or through coaching and mentoring opportunities. The learning is based on current research with a focus on both excellence and equity. Our staff experiences this through the learning that occurs in system leadership meetings, central staff meetings, as well as learning opportunities for school leaders, system leaders, professional staff, teaching staff, school-based support staff, and central system support staff. The ultimate goal, student achievement, being responsive to student need, and student well-being and learning. We will engage in continuous reflection and ask ourselves, what are the most powerful steps we can take to center Indigenous rights, human rights, and equity in all that we do? Are we advancing our operational goals? Who benefits? Who's further disadvantaged? What are our next steps in response to the feedback that we have achieved? These questions are important because they will support in ensuring that all staff grow as individuals and professionals.
In addition to the strategies that we've outlined in terms of what we've been able to do so far this year, I did want to say that we've recently received additional funding from the Ministry of Education, which means we will be able to put additional tutoring in place and student success supports between now and the end of the year, as well as support summer programs. And of course, in September, we'll then provide trustees with the measurement in terms of outcomes of how we've been able to accomplish these key goals from the strategic plan. So thank you very much for your attention tonight, and we're happy to take any questions you have.
All right. So interested in some questions or comments from trustees? And call on Trustee Lundquist. Go ahead, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. So I want to start with the things I really appreciate about the presentation. So I appreciate the commitment to human rights and Indigenous rights, and I appreciate the challenge that exists in terms of embedding that into the culture of education and into the culture of the board. And I've only been a trustee for 3 years, and I've seen strides, remarkable strides, frankly, in that short period of time. But I'm concerned a little bit about this presentation because it isn't addressing some of the things that I hear mostly about. So gaps, like genuine gaps that have been created as a result of the pandemic and our plan for addressing them. I've had several parents reach out to me recently, high school students in particular, about the way they are being told to address it, which is to provide private tutors, essentially. And to me, if that's our answer to these kinds of things, then we need to reevaluate what our plan is, because that's not a plan at all. But there are some bigger issues here that worry me, and I listen to this really carefully because I am someone who cares deeply about human dignity and people's ability to engage in a system in a way that respects the fundamentals of who they are. That matters in every aspect of life, and including in education. And I don't want a single student to leave our system not feeling like their voices, that their experiences are not reflected in what they've been taught and in the way that they've been engaged with over the course of their academic career. But it strikes me that there's very little discussion about actual education. And I don't understand why, because to me, the center of what we do is education. And so I get that these things are a part of that, and necessarily so. But as a parent, and I can only speak about my role as a parent because I'm not an educator. And as a trustee, I can speak about what parents are coming to me with, and they're concerned about violence in schools. They're concerned about academic success. They're concerned about gaps. They're concerned that that we don't have a plan for addressing some of these really big picture issues, and some of them are pandemic related and some of them are not, and I'm willing to acknowledge that. But I heard 100 slides really of human rights and Indigenous rights, and I'm not discounting the importance of those things, but I didn't hear a lot about our plans for education. And I think that's a gap. And I think that it's a gap, at least in terms of knowledge transfer. I'm not saying that there's actually a gap, right? It may be that we're doing a bunch of really amazing things. And I, as a parent, am not aware of it. As a trustee, I'm not aware of it either. And so to me, that says we've missed something. And that's something I would like someone to address in some way, because I don't have answers for parents, and I don't have answers as a parent. And I think it's important that parents that parents engage with the education system in a way that makes sense to them in terms of their own children's experience. And right now, I don't feel that way as a parent, and I know that many don't.
Director Marsh.
Thank you. So I think when we think about our disaggregated achievement data, which we do have and which we have shared with trustees, what we understand is that identity actually plays a huge role in terms of a student's ability to be able to engage as a confident learner and experience a sense of belonging. And the research through the pandemic has really been clear that those districts that are paying attention to identity, as well as lived experiences and relationships, are the ones that are serving students the best, because students whose mental health is challenged during the pandemic, if we're not aware of that and addressing it, then we have a challenge. And so we know that for our students, the disaggregated data shows that we really do need to focus on UDL. And so our entry point into universal design for learning is definitely by looking at the intersectionality of identities and making sure that all staff understand the way that the system has not worked in the past in terms of supporting student learning. So when we're talking about the professional learning that we're offering staff, that is our way in, so that we can implement UDL in an effective manner, understanding that cultural responsiveness and UDL really go side by side. In terms of specific gaps, our answer is definitely not to seek private tutoring. We have student success rooms. We have qualified staff in every school to assist students who are experiencing challenges and to provide formative feedback and assist that student in being successful. So where there are individual situations where that is the message, we are happy to follow up, because that is not the message families should be receiving. It is in fact contrary to the whole idea of equitable opportunities. So most definitely we'll follow up on any individual situation where that has been the message. We have student success teams in every single secondary school working to support students. The other thing that I'll also say is that the most recent announcement will provide us with greater resources in terms of those supports in schools. So we will be working with the Federation as we determine how to use this funding during instructional time, as well as during after hours. So I do think that there are things in place. Associate Director Markowski, I don't know if you have anything to add in terms of that side of it. The other work we've been doing, of course, which we identify in the report, is a focus on that inclusive grade 9 and understanding that that gets ready. And we talked about the early years and even the pre-early years in terms of the pathway that students experience in our schools. And so the inclusive programming is a significant part of that. And knowing that we have to work with elementary schools to ensure that there's an understanding of not counseling students out, of not suggesting that their solution is a different course pathway when they're very young, but in fact we have a responsibility to be assisting students in closing gaps. The knowledge hook that was an example used earlier in this meeting is another thing that is widely used in our schools. And that is an excellent tool in terms of providing teachers with formative feedback around mathematics learning as the example. So those sorts of things are happening, Trustee Lundquist, and they are very actively happening in all of our schools.
Supplemental, Trustee Lundquist?
So I appreciate all of those things, and I appreciate the connection between student identity and success, and I'm not disputing that in any way, the importance of that. But we talked about global competencies this evening, and to me, you know, I think we're getting very focused on the attitudes and values part, which I think are important, and I'm not as confident that we're as competent or as focused on the knowledge and skills part of that. But the last thing I wanted to observe about this report was the student voice issue. So I've raised it a couple of times because I think it really matters. And I'm hoping that whatever student voice, whatever approach we're developing to obtaining student voice, that we're making sure that it's a diverse bunch of voices. There are many students who don't engage with Student Senate, who aren't the kind of student who sees themselves reflected in that world and who aren't engaged. And I'm hoping that whatever the plan is to expand student voice, that it encourages greater participation amongst a cross section of students who are not necessarily the high achieving academic streamed students, but that actually are different voices within the school system.
For sure. And I wouldn't mind turning it over to Superintendent Davis, who's leading that work, just to give you a bit of we're not as far along with student voice as we would have been maybe if we hadn't had the pandemic, but there is a lot of foundational work occurring now. And Superintendent Davis, if you could explain some of that, that might be helpful.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Trustee Lundquist, I'm very excited to hear you say and ask the questions that you're asking, because we have a process. We, exactly as Director Marcia said, we're not as far along. Student Senate is one bucket of student voice. So we actually have very specific buckets of student focus groups that we're going out to. Even students who have graduated, that's one bucket to hear some lessons that we've learned. And we have reached out to our different departments, our equity departments, our students who identify in different ways, our Black students, our neurodiverse students, in order to have those buckets. So we have focus groups prepared to go into the schools to ask specific questions about their learning, to ask questions about their experiences, and to see what the impact of our intentions are from their voices. So you will see in upcoming reports the results of some of that work.
Thank you. I'll go to Trustee Morton. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate receiving this report. There are two statements that really jump out to me, and if you've known me very long, you know what my priorities are. The first statement is the well-being of both students and staff remains a focus as we look forward to more ideal learning and working conditions. The second sentence that I really appreciate is this: school systems that focus on positive relationships and well-being, along with ambitious academic achievement, are the ones that will have students excelling. So I simply want to say to you, thank you for recognizing the importance of mental, social, emotional well-being. That's key.
Thank you, Trustee Morton. And moving on to Kayla.
Hi. First, I just wanted to agree with Chair Morton. I was very pleased to see that there was a lot to do with mental health and well-being towards students and staff. So I really enjoyed that piece. I did have a question for Director Marsh. You had mentioned student success for students who may be struggling in a few courses, but I've had a lot of students come to me personally and just ask, like, what do they do if they don't feel comfortable going to student success or speaking to the teachers and using the resources inside that facility that we do offer in every single school, which is great. But what do they do if they don't feel comfortable with that? And how do they find tutors for the courses that they may be struggling in? Because a lot of guidance offices now don't actually offer lists of professional tutors. So I've had quite a few students ask me a few of those questions. So I'm not sure if you have the answers to that.
Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you for your comments. You know, I think about the use of the student resource rooms and student success rooms, and it makes me think back to when we first introduced technology for some students, and they weren't comfortable making use of the technology, even though it would help them, because they didn't want to stand out. And so, and now everyone uses technology in the classroom, and no one thinks twice about students having a laptop and what that laptop may or may not be doing in terms of assisting a student to access their learning. And so I think the vision around student success is very similar in terms of working to integrate those teams so it just feels like it's part of the high school experience. And Superintendent Nevels, I don't know if you want to add a little bit more in terms of the work that's been going on between learning support and student success and guidance.
Thank you, Director Martin. That's spot on, Kayla, in terms of those resources that are available at the school level. And I would encourage you, if you're having conversations with students that don't feel comfortable, that maybe they get a friend and they go down together, because as soon as they come into that space, they'll actually see what it's about and they might start to feel a little bit more comfortable. Sometimes it's the fear of the unknown as well that prevents students from accessing those resources. I think the other option for a student would be is to have a conversation with the teacher that works in there, or with their administrative team, with their vice principal, or with one of their classroom teachers as well that can talk with them a little bit about what the supports are available, and maybe even go down with them to check out that space and to see what type of resources are available there. We're continuing to work with our academic resource rooms, our student success, to amalgamate them together into one kind of location where it is supports for all students, just like Director Marsh said, in the hopes that it becomes a space where all students feel comfortable to come down to seek any support that they need.
Thank you, Superintendent Nevels. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you for that, Kayla. Thank you for bringing that forward. I'm just going to move on our agenda to section 7, and go back to Director Marsh for the director's update.
Thank you very much. It's going to be very brief given we've done the operational update. I did want to make trustees aware, however, that following the March break, we will be doing the registration for virtual and in-person learning. As you know, the staffing process and the timelines are such that we do need to get concrete information in terms of those families who wish to continue on in virtual schooling for next year. So following the March break, that registration will be open to families. And also just wanted to flag that the Ontario Human Rights Commission has released its Right to Read report. Within that report, there were 157 recommendations for faculties of education, school boards, and the Ministry of Education. The vast majority of them are connected to Ministry of Education and direction from the Ministry of Education to school boards. So we are looking forward to hearing more from the Ministry of Education as we believe in the importance of the report. And also recognize that within the report, one of the recommendations is that the Ministry of Education appropriately fund the work that does need to occur in schools. So we will keep you updated on that very important report, but we very much look forward to implementing the recommendations once the Ministry of Education is able to start making the changes it needs to province-wide. And that concludes my update. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments for Director Marsh this evening? And I'm seeing none. So we have no recommended actions this evening, section 8. So moving on to section 9, information items, 9A. I'm going to go to our student trustees, James, DeMario, and Kayla, for the student trustee report.
Awesome. So I will be beginning tonight. Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, we would like to provide our monthly student trustee report. At our previous Student Senate meeting on February 22nd, we had the privilege of having Superintendent Elmhurst, Superintendent Lazarus, Superintendent Negro, and Superintendent Hamid join as panelists. Collectively, the Senate had a meaningful discussion regarding the importance of student leadership.
We had the pleasure of having DBN, Durham Black Educators Network, present at our most recent Senate meeting as well. There, they discuss what their organization is, the events and conferences they run for students within the DDSB, as well as opportunities for Black students and allies to lead and help within the district. They ended the presentation by presenting this year's scholarships that are now open for student applications. In our other updates, we have now begun our student trustee elections for the 2022-2023 school year. At our previous Senate meeting, we spoke to the senators about the upcoming elections, as well as the process in each region. We also discussed the pros and cons of the job, what to look forward to in the role, and what to keep in mind while applying. We should have the candidates' names by mid-next week and have the names of our next year's student trustees by early April. We cannot wait to watch their elections and welcome them to the amazing experience of a student trustee.
As expected, we have received mixed responses about opinions about returning to a semester system from our students. Some students prefer the quadmester system because it granted them the opportunity to handle 2 courses instead of 4. In addition, some of these students also enjoyed quadmesters because they felt like the increased pace made them feel more prepared for post-secondary education. With regard to the students who prefer semesters, from what we've heard, they prefer semesters since they last for a longer duration of time, allowing them to receive more time to learn and review academic concepts. Regardless of the preference between semesters and quadmesters, we are certain that all of our students will be able to thrive in the remaining months of the school year and in their future endeavors.
As mentioned in our previous standing committee meeting, the upcoming Elementary Leadership Conference has been rescheduled to take place on Wednesday, March 9th. The purpose of this conference is to promote student leadership within DDSB elementary schools while providing students who may need an extra push into student leadership with the opportunity to learn about leadership and its different types. We are looking forward to the event and are hoping that it will be as engaging as we anticipate.
This concludes our report. We would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions for our student trustees this evening? And I'm seeing none. So I'd like to thank James, DeMario, and Kayla. And moving on to item 9B, And I'll call on Associate Director David Wright for the Capital Priorities Program.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce through you, Madam Chair, Head of Facility Services, Lisa Bianca, and Carrie Trombino, Manager of Property and Planning, who are here to present the report.
Great. Thank you very much, and through you, Madam Chair. This evening, as has been stated, we're here to talk about the capital priorities submissions that have been put in by the Durham District School Board. These are requested annually by the Ministry of Education, and they may be submitted based on the criteria that is established by the ministry. In your package, you can see the eligibility and evaluation criteria for these projects. Projects may also contain a childcare component if that need is supported by the Consolidated Municipal Service Manager for our region. So going back to spring 2021, a proposal call was issued by the ministry for projects to be completed in the 2024-2025 school year. And the board did submit 5 projects on May 21st, 2021. Those school projects were the unnamed North Oshawa Secondary School, an unnamed Seton Public Elementary School, unnamed West Whitby Public Elementary, unnamed North Oshawa Elementary, as well as a 6-classroom addition for Clara Hughes Public School. Unfortunately, on February 4th, 2022, we received a notification from the Ministry of Education that none of our projects had been selected to move forward. So following that, DDSB staff reached out to the ministry and requested a debrief so that we could better understand what we could do to make future projects more stronger and more likely to succeed. So we did meet with ministry staff February 11th, and while they did recognize that we were a growing board and that the business cases were strong, they felt that just that the number of projects submitted had far exceeded what was available. We went through the projects in detail with the ministry so we could better understand how to make these stronger, how to make them more successful in the future. And there were 3 main points. One takeaway was the recommendation to look where we could make these projects increase the project size. It had been their experience that projects that were larger were better able to meet benchmark and had a greater success of being able to be constructed within the funding model. Second recommendation was to take a look at the enrollment information and update it as possible. This latest proposal call was for projects that would open in the 2026 school year. So there's 2 years of additional growth. So which certainly help to make the projects more viable and stronger. And the last thing they asked us to look at was to take a good look at schools within 3 kilometers of the proposed project and look at utilization rate with a target of being 100% utilized within 5 years of operation. So having done all of that, on the 4th of going back to the 4th of February, that was also when we received the proposal call for the 2022 year. And these projects, as I said, were slated to be opened in 26-27. We were able to submit 5 project proposals. It was capped at 5, and a minimum of 2 projects needed to be new proposals. 3 were permitted to be unsuccessful submissions from the year before, but 2 needed to be new proposals. A change in scope to one of the 2021 projects was considered a new proposal. So given that we were not successful with our 5 2021 submissions and that they remained our top priority, we went back and re-reviewed the data and and placed our submissions on those projects. 2 were straight resubmissions, and that was the unnamed Seton Public School, which was already a 634 pupil place school, and the unnamed North Oshawa Public School, also a 634 pupil place school. They were resubmitted as is. We went back and looked at the North Oshawa School, and with the growth that we've been having in that area, we were able to increase the size of that school from 1,214 students to 1,387. Making it a larger facility that would be able to serve more students. We also reviewed the unnamed West Whitby submission and increased that from 513 to 634 pupil places. The Clara Hughes edition, which they very specifically pointed out, they thought we could take more growth and that a larger project could be supported. We increased from 6 classrooms to 6 classrooms plus 2 kindergartens and also 2 childcare rooms. I should add that all the other elementary schools that were submitted all do have childcare components to them as well. So with that, I'll just go over our order of priority. North Oshawa Secondary is our #1 priority. This is our 6th time submitting this request. The Clara Hughes edition is #2. Seton Public School is #3. We changed the order of the North Oshawa and the West Whitby submissions. Earlier, they were, North Oshawa was 4, West Whitby was 5. Based on the growth that we've seen in those 2 communities, we felt that West Whitby was a #4 submission and North Oshawa was #5. So I'm happy to take any questions on our submissions.
Thank you, Lisa. I see Trustee Barrett is the first up with his question. Go ahead, Michael.
And probably will come at no surprise, Lisa, whatsoever. Just a couple of clarifications. Was there criteria that if you submitted the project this time and it was rejected, that it could not come back the next time, or did I misunderstand that?
No, there's no, we don't have any information. The 2022 submission, if they are unsuccessful, I have to assume that we can resubmit the following year. They've never put that restriction on us before, so, and it wasn't noted in the memorandum.
Okay, but the new restriction was that we had to have 2 new ones.
It was. So from the 2021 submission, it was, sort of tick a box and they'll reconsider it. But then they wanted 2 new ones. Well, it would have been great if we had received 2 previously. I'm sure we could find 2 more projects, but by being able to change the scope, they were willing to consider them new projects. So we were able to put in our highest and most urgent.
Well, it does seem like a little bit, for the unwashed myself, who has no idea how bureaucracy works and how they make these type of decisions, though my cynicism is rife. I find it somewhat a bit of an oxymoron in the sense that they're suggesting that there's way too many projects across the province, but we want new projects submitted, which then to me, in my inability to be able to do math, would say to me that you actually increase, with the exception of modifying a school, what it would do to me is you would actually end up with more potential schools and even a greater backlog sitting in the province, in the ministry. So, it just doesn't, anyway. Now, what I find interesting is when you went through the 3 items that we had to be able to consider, it talked about being able to strengthen the need for the project if you could demonstrate that there by year 5, you would be 100% capacity. So that is interesting because Pierre Elliott Trudeau, which is before your time, Lisa, has been at 110% capacity since the day it opened and continues to be able to be at over capacity. And that one's not even on the list, which is just fine with me. I understand that. But I find it a little oxymoronish again, just in the sense that you want to increase the scope So now you've gone from 1214 to 1387, which then means that to be able to meet that 100% in year 5, you actually need more growth in order to be able to satisfy that. I mean, it just kind of seems to me moving that target further and further away. And I know that in 5 years' time, we won't recognize what North Oshawa will look like. It will not look like what it does today. I've been in Oshawa some 37, 38 years. It doesn't look like it did back then. It won't look like it will in 5 years as well. So, I appreciate the continued advocacy for the schools. It's just not about Oshawa. It's about Durham's growth. Oshawa has one of the fastest growing population rates across the province. It's not being recognized in being able to ensure. Durham as a whole has a significant growth rate as well. But don't worry, I've already decided what the name for the new secondary school is going to be. It's going to be, the Mirage Secondary School, because as we get closer to it, it fades and disappears quicker and quicker all the time, through no fault of the staff that continues to advocate for what needs to be advocated for. So thank you, Lisa, for the report. I look forward to some good news in the upcoming weeks, or some bad press if it doesn't. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Chair Morton.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher, Chair Thatcher, and thank you, Lisa, for joining us this evening. I really appreciate this report. Talking about capital priorities, I know that this rebuild of Beaverton and Thora is definitely one of our priorities, and I know why it's not included in this list. But I'm thinking that if we have any constituents from Brock who are listening to this or see this report, they would question why their school isn't on this list. So I'm wondering if you could explain that, Lisa.
Certainly. Thank you, Trustee or Chair Morton, and through you, Madam Chair. The reason that Beaverton Thora rebuild isn't on this list is because we already have received the allocation for it. So these are for, this submission is for projects that do not have an allocation at this point, and they would be brand new projects to the board to move forward. We were very fortunate to receive the allocation for Beaverton Thora several years ago, and we are continuing to work with the ministry to try and bring this that much needed school to fruition, but that's why it's not on the list. It's already underway. It's already has had an allocation, and it's just a matter of getting to that finish line and getting it under construction.
Thank you for that explanation, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair Morton, and thank you, Lisa, for answering our questions. I'm moving on then on the agenda to item 9D, and I'll call on Trustee Donna Edwards to present the trustee determination and distribution. Go ahead, Donna.
Did we skip an item?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think C is.
Yes, pardon me. I've written around them, so it's faded into the background.
You cannot end the meeting quicker by skipping items on the agenda, Chair.
Exactly. I'm trying my best. I apologize, Superintendent Crossdale, because your item 9C, positive school climates update, is the next one on the agenda.
No problem at all. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. The report can be found on pages 54 to 68 of your package this evening. We just presented our operational plan update, and you will note that a focus on positive school climate intersects with all facets of our operational priorities. The report this evening builds on our operational planning and provides trustees with information on our collective efforts to build and sustain positive school climates across all our DDSB learning environments. Staff have utilized 3 main data sources for this report: the School Climate and Wellbeing Survey, which we run biannually, data from our employee incident reports, and school suspension statistics. The collective analysis of this data provides considerable insight into our school environments. Overall, this is a good news report. Despite the learning disruptions of the past 2 years, we have seen positive gains in student reporting increases in the areas of belonging and connectedness, and also in meaningful and engaged learning. Parents also report increases in both of these areas. We view this as an incredible accomplishment and a real testament to the innovative and hard work of our educators. We note significant decreases in all forms of bullying on the students, staff, parent guardian surveys. However, for those students who identify as gender fluid, gender non-conforming, non-binary, transgender, two-spirit, and questioning, bullying is still a concern and has been identified as a priority for our work moving forward. Suspension data over the past 6 years has been on a steady decline for the system. We are now below the regional and provincial averages. We have noted that some students are overrepresented in the suspension data, and we recognize that we have some key work to do in this area. Looking at the data through our equity lens, we were able to glean our strengths in areas that require attention. Reviewing this material in our departments and school teams will allow us to develop actionable plans with targeted interventions that align with our Indigenous rights and human rights principles. This will be further supported by a system-wide focus on building collaborative cultures, data analysis, and targeted professional learning that allows us to dig deeper with our positive school climate data. We are excited to have positive results with a clear indication of where we need to continue to reinforce our core priorities. As we move forward and build on our success, we will continue to provide you with data and updates on positive school climates through our operational planning. That is our report this evening. We would be happy to take any questions. Also with us this evening is System Lead Positive School Climate, Michael Mahir, and Chris Conley, Manager, Research and Assessment, Accountability and Assessment, to help with questions.
All right. So Superintendent Crossdale, we're looking to see if we've got any questions or comments from trustees tonight. And I'm seeing none.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I have my.
Oh, I'm sorry, Darlene, I didn't see it. Go ahead when you're ready.
I put up the human hands and.
Oh,
sorry. Just quickly, Superintendent Crossdale, I do really appreciate the report. And, you know, I'm just wondering, and I appreciate the aspects that you noted where we have a need to still work on. And I'm just wondering, for parents who have a sense of that there is a disconnect between what we're reporting and what they're experiencing, how I guess, how do we address this so that we're really ensuring that there is an alignment between what we're seeing and maybe the reason why we're seeing it versus some people's lived experiences, if that makes sense. I hope it does.
Yeah, I think perhaps we need to have better communication with parents to be able to keep them in the know of what's happening, and not just the positive things, but things that we need to work on as well too. I know that I've kind of given a good news story, but there's also things that, you know, we definitely have to get better on. And I think the message to all parents is that, you know, that's what we're trying to do in terms of our department. And, you know, we renamed it to Positive School Climate because we want it to be a positive school climate. We don't want safe schools to be all about suspensions and expulsions, but that we are, you know, we're not just a department that stands alone. We are with all the other departments as well in terms of making a better school experience for students.
Trustee Forbes, I might just build on that a little bit as well. In terms of when there are specific situations, it's really important if parents don't feel like things have not gone the way that they would hope in terms of communication with the teacher or school administration. There is, of course, the superintendent to be able to provide assistance in terms of communications and problem solving. So I think in terms of specific situations, it is really important to always encourage them to continue to reach out so that we can problem solve together. In terms of the other statistics, I guess it would depend on which specific data, but one of the things that we're aware of is that every source of data that we collect, and one of the reasons why we included different sets here in terms of different aspects of positive school climate, is the fact that they all tell a slightly different story, but you try to put them together and then figure out, okay, what seems to be going well and where do we need to improve, which I think Superintendent Crossdale spoke about just now. But the other part is when we go back to Superintendent Davis's work in terms of student voice, that's why we want to get more and more emphasis on that student voice, that qualitative experience as well, to help improve our planning, because sometimes the data can feel one-dimensional. And through that student focus group, there's an opportunity for us to understand better the narratives from a student's perspective. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Do you have a supplemental, Darlene?
No, I just thank you for your thoughtful responses. Thank you.
All right, looks like we're moving on to that item 9D, and I'll call on Trustee Edwards. Go ahead, Donna.
All right, I'm just pulling up a document so that I have it in front of me. Basically, I just, by the end of March, trustees are required to follow regulations 412/00, which requires us to do the calculations and around trustee determination and distribution. The determination is the number of trustees, which we had heard from a brief update the last meeting that we received our PEG report, and it really wasn't going to be any changes in the number of trustees. There is a distribution guide or a trustee's guide, and to determine that, and I think that was sent out to everybody. And so there's templates there to do the calculations, and we were required to send our calculations and a motion of how our distribution is going to be, whether it stays the same, etc., to the minister and the clerks of the municipalities, as well as the other school boards within the jurisdiction. So it was just, again, just an update that we'll probably end up doing it. And to let you know that I pulled the 2021 census information that I could, and did similar calculations of what the data I could get, and it didn't change the number of trustees either, as far as I was concerned, any real significant difference. So we still have 11 trustees, but that report will be coming forward, as I said, at the March board, for us to make those two motions and ensure that report, which is called the D&D report, gets to the minister and the various other organizations. And that's just my update.
Thanks, Donna. Any questions or comments?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Trustee Crawford.
Is there also going to be a presentation by David Wright? Or are we limited to this one?
I think, Director Marsh, did you want to address that?
I was just going to say the report is scheduled for the board meeting in terms of compliance with the ministry expectation that we have it before March. And I see Associate Director Wright had his hand up, so perhaps I jumped the gun there and I rushed it, and perhaps he has more to say.
Associate Director Marsh, or Associate Director Wright, sorry.
Appreciate that, Madam Chair. Thank you. And thanks, Director Marsh. That is what I was going to say. The intention is to bring a fulsome report to the March board meeting with all the relevant analytics in terms of where the board was in 2018 in terms of trustee distribution and what it looks like for 2022. Spoiler alert, it looks very similar. So the intention, Trustee Crawford, was to bring all the information and have the conversations at March board. But if there are any specific questions through the chair, really happy to try and answer them for you.
Oh, well, I guess my concern is that this report has to be in by March 31st. And if we're going to make any changes, or even if we weren't, we ordinarily would discuss that over a period of time. And I'm assuming that it will require an amendment to our own bylaw on trustee distribution. Yes?
Director Marsh, I see your hand is up. I'm not sure if Trustee Edwards wanted to address that. Shall I go to Trustee Edwards and come back to you? Okay,
I'm happy
thank
to
you.
do that for sure.
There's no bylaws that address the distribution of trustees, and as far as that's concerned, bylaw 9 is a geographic administration description of our regulation 412/200 is actually what that determines the distribution of trustees, and you're correct that if we wanted to, we could go through, but we have to go through those calculations. And as I said, spoiler alert from Associate Director Wright, is that the number of trustees is still 11. So again, the specific calculations, the guides were sent to you so you can actually see what the calculation is and how it's done. So there's really no change to bylaws that has to be done at this point in time.
Thank you, Donna. I'll go to Director March.
Thank you. In terms of the report, I just wanted to assure trustees that we actually did go back to 4 years ago, the last time this process occurred, to make sure we were following the identical practice in terms of bringing it to board at the end of March. So it did not appear on standing committees prior to then.
Thank you.
Well, if I may, do you mind if I read my concerns into the record?
Go ahead, Trustee
Madam
Crawford.
Chair? Well, just to give you a background on this, I had prepared a motion dealing with the 2018 situation that was to be dealt with at our February board meeting. It was not dealt with because the mover of the motion, me, was absent. I did not leave the virtual meeting. Some people have indicated I had left. What had happened is I was disconnected by Zoom and could not get back in. I only use that to explain that I did not leave the meeting. But because we knew that trustee distribution and determination would come up this 2022 election year, I raised the question a few months ago through the chair about the 2018 amendment. In 2018, staff presented the board a possible change to the trustee determination and distribution for that election year. There was a couple of weeks of discussion and consulting with the communities. The board was presented with two options. One, status quo, which would keep the municipalities of Brock, Uxbridge separated from Skugog at one trustee for each. Or option B, we would combine them and have one trustee for the north. The board chose B, and that affected the upcoming election in the north and in Whitby and our bylaw on trustee distribution and determination. Jumping forward to 2022 and the chair's question about the 2018 amendment, the answer seems to be there was no amendment in 2018. I believe we should solve that question before we deal with 2022. If we did not change or amend our bylaw in 2018, why did we go through the process as outlined in our minutes from March and also submit a report to the ministry describing the changes? Our bylaws state how amendments are to be handled. It may be that Regulation 412 has the answer as to why we would not amend our bylaws, but I cannot find it, and I'm again suggesting that we should solve that mystery before March 31st to determine if we're following the process. Those are my concerns, and whatever you want to do with that, you can. I've done as much as I can do with it. I just don't think that we should be leaving this at loose ends, and I don't think that referring to 412 means that we don't have to amend our bylaws.
And Trustee Crawford, I'm just going to go to Trustee Barrett. Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, thank you. And I was certainly chair of the board when this whole process came through, and there was a number of concerns raised with it. In fact, a number of trustees called individuals outside of this board, including the Ministry of Education and OPSPA, when they were not satisfied with the protocol. We've had 2 legal rulings that the process that we followed was absolutely correct. We have listened as trustees to those 2 rulings. And I would suggest that this issue, I mean, any trustee has the right to continue to raise an issue, and I support any trustee's right to be able to do that. But we've had 2 legal rulings on this, that it was not a requirement to be able to physically change the bylaws. We changed the election, how we were going to elect them. Trustee Crawford is absolutely correct. But we've had 2 legal rulings that this was within the rights. We did not have to change the bylaw. I see no need to continue to be able to revisit this a 3rd time. But again, anyone has the right to be able to bring it forward, as we have the right to be able to just continue on in the process. And I don't really, opinions are one thing, and whether 412 applies or not, I mean, I can appreciate people's opinion, but we've had 2 legal, like I've said it 3 times now, we've had 2 legal interpretations that what we did was absolutely correct, and that people didn't like it is one thing, following process is another. So it can come back to the board, but I'll say the same things again. This was not ill-conceived. It was not necessary to change the bylaw, and therefore anything done in 2018, as far as I'm concerned, is settled and solved. We need to be able to determine what the trustee determination is going to be in 2022. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. Associate Director Wright, did you wish to add anything to that? No, it was covered. Okay, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
May I speak to that, because maybe you have the solution, and all we need to do is to produce those 2 legal opinions, and that will probably solve the mystery of 412. So the sooner we can have those and have a look at them, the better. I don't want this to go on either.
Trustee Crawford, I'm just wondering if are you putting forward a motion here?
Yes, I am.
So would you mind just giving us the motion? We certainly will be very happy to vote on it. So go ahead.
Well, I'm suggesting that we solve the question about the decision that there was no amendment in 2018.
There wasn't.
That's the only thing I'm concerned with, not with many of the other things that we dealt with over the years. I'm just concerned that it seems the final say on this was there was no amendment in 2018, and it seems to be based on what is written in 412. So the 2 legal opinions, and someone should point out in 412 what it is that says we do not need to amend our bylaw.
Trustee Crawford, I'm looking for your motion.
Okay, to strike a small committee of 2 or 3 interested parties to determine the question as to whether or not an amendment was made in 2018. And if it wasn't, to explain the reasons why. And I'd be happy to sit on that committee. Maybe there's a couple of other nerdy type trustees that like reading this stuff, but
Okay.
a little
Thank you.
investigation might do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. I'm looking for a seconder for the motion. A seconder for the motion. And I'm seeing none. All right, so Trustee Crawford, I'm going to move on now on the agenda to item 9E and go to Trustee Barnes for the OPSPA report. Go ahead, Patrice.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So the Oxford Board of Directors meeting was February 25th and 26th. We had a presentation on the Ontario e-learning consortium by John Proctor, the chair, and Todd Pottle, the coordinator. We also discussed education funding, the GSN for student needs. We discussed legislative updates and the upcoming provincial and municipal election. That is my report.
Thank you very much, Trustee Barnes. And moving on to the committee reports, item 10 on your agenda. And we're going to go back to Trustee Barnes for the report from the Equity and Diversity Ad Hoc Steering Committee.
Thank you. The report can be found on page 69, the minutes. Any questions or concerns, please let me know.
Thank you for your report, Trustee Barnes. I'm seeing no questions or comments. Looking for Darlene's hand? No. Okay. Item 11 is we have 4 correspondence letters in our section 11. And just like to draw your attention to that. As be there no further business before the board tonight, the meeting does now adjourn. Thank you, everyone, and good night.